Vanakkam. Welcome to this course on classics in neuroscience. In the last series of videos, we looked at pharmaceutical agents that could help with patients of neuropsychiatry or those who have psychological or psychiatric disorders. In this series of videos, starting with this video, we will look at theoretical neuroscience and how we can consider the brain as a computer and the computer as a sort of a brain. So, throughout, although we have described development of experimental methods, development of analytical techniques, development of methods to interpret data, throughout as these developments have been going on, what has also happened is the development of theory. Throughout, theory has developed. A concern is that theory is not as developed as the experimental and analytical approaches is a reasonable concern, but theory has also developed. That is the point. It may not have developed as much. So, in this video, we will look at theoretical neuroscience, the brain as a computer and the computer as a brain, and we will look at the metaphor of symbolic logic and the seminal work of Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts. In the last few weeks, we have seen how specific functions of neurons or the neuronal system, the understanding has been improved by theory. What is the contribution of theory? For example, in chapter 2, we looked at the physical model of DNA by Watson and Crick. In chapter 4, field membrane theory of Goldman-Hodgkin Katz. I think that is the Goldman-Hodgkin Katz equation, mathematical model of action potential, neuronal action potential by Hodgkin and Huxley. Poisson binomial theory for synaptic vesicle release by Del Castillo and Katz, a very crucial contribution. Dendritic branching theory of Wilfred Rahl. Synaptic learning theory by Hebb, and we also looked at the energy metabolism of the brain. So, throughout, what we have seen is one of the universal elements of the neuronal system is the presence of impulse or communication through impulses and communication through synapses. This is one of the universal elements of the central nervous system. Meanwhile, what has also happened in other fields is something that is worth keeping a note of. Boole in 1854 came up with an interesting approach to studying and understanding logic. This approach was left to obscurity for a while, but then it was given a new lease of life by the new generation of scientists of the 1900s, especially Claude Shannon, who developed his theory of communication using this foundations of Boolean logic, and also the work of McCulloch and Pitts in 1943. Then the work of John von Neumann and others considering the brain as a computer, and game theory based work by John von Neumann and Morgenstern, and the work on information theory by Shannon and Weaver, and the extraordinary contributions of Wiener to cybernetics, and the idea of cell assembly by Donald Hebb, and this idea of artificial intelligence that became an interesting buzzword in the 1950s. It is still an interesting buzzword. This is 2024. Even now, whenever we say artificial intelligence, there is an excitement. So, in 1854, George Boole published his work on an investigation of the laws of thought on which are founded the mathematical theories of logic and probabilities. In this treatise, he came up with three basic methods by which logic can be communicated. When you say, for example, this and this, or x and y, can be communicated with one command, and A or B or K and not L, this and not, or essentially just not. These ideas remained in relative obscurity until Claude Shannon discovered them, and it immediately occurred to him that this could have deep applications. So, this has huge potential. So, he demonstrated, Claude Shannon, he demonstrated optimization of Boolean algebra using electromechanical relays, and he employed properties of electrical switches to process logic. So, until Claude Shannon discovered this idea of and, or, and not by Boole remained known only within the logic community, and it was believed that there was practically no practical application of this. Boole himself had suggested that his approach had crucial implications for understanding brain. Let me read from the text. No general method for the solution of questions in the theory of probabilities can be established which does not explicitly recognize those universal laws of thought which are the basis of all reasoning. So, even when these were formulated, there was some idea that we could somehow use these to understand the brain. Later, Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts started asking the question how these universal laws of thought are happening in the brain, or more precisely, how are these universal laws of thought are implemented within the brain. Remember, in week 5 we discussed about the visual system, where we discussed the collaboration of McCulloch and Pitts to discuss what the frog's eye tells the frog's brain. Remember that. So, it is the same team that also worked on this question of object of this study was how are universal laws of thought implemented in the brain. So, Warren McCulloch studied philosophy and psychology at Yale University, and in 1934 he started research in neurophysiology with Desert de Barren at Yale University. And he studied connections in the cerebral cortex. Artificial activation by local application of strychnine blocked inhibition, for example, and he found that there was when this happens, there was also an intense activation of some distant targets. From the beginning, he was interested in coming up with a model of how the brain worked, so much so that when he was an intern, his fellow interns accused him of trying to come up with an equation to describe the brain, and he says that my fellow interns accused me of coming up with an equation to describe the brain. I am still trying to come up with an equation to describe the brain. So, this was his aim for the longest time. Walter Pitts was a prodigious child. He was a child prodigy. He learned logic, mathematics, Latin and Greek in 1935 at the age of 12, and at the age of 15 he ran away and went to Chicago. where he attended the lectures of Rudolf Carnap on logic and logical positivism. So, in collaboration with McCulloch and Letwin, there was this work that they came up with, which they called as a logical calculus of the ideas immanent in the nervous activity. And there they utilized the all or none characteristic of the action potential or the neuronal activity. Essentially, this is a binary logic gate, either on or off. Yes. Of course, they did not include graded potentials, representation of the neuron as a single cell. They practically ignored the dendritic tree and all those things. So, essentially they were not using the complicated neuronal connections, but rather using oversimplified neurons and neuronal connections that performed logical operations. This may not be perfect to describe the actual reality, but this is what they first attempted. With this, we come to the end of this video. In this video, we introduced the notion of theoretical neuroscience, the field of theoretical neuroscience, and how the brain can be viewed as a computer and the computer can be viewed as a brain. And we also introduced the notion of or the metaphor of symbolic logic and the work of Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts. With this, we end this video. Thank you for your attention.